So, what does a lesbian vampire like to suck? Hey everyone, welcome to Princess of Gay. I'm your host Connie, and today we are here with my blind reaction to Dracula's daughter. Uh, Sorry for that cold open. I had to. I couldn't even keep a straight face though. Um, so in 1936, um, this movie was released, which, by the way, I think might make it the oldest movie I've reacted to on this channel. I think. I'm not 100% certain, but this movie was released and it was the first American made movie to feature a queer character. And for, I think, even a long time afterwards, it was the first one to feature a queer character in a, I guess, more positive light. Or I might be thinking of a different movie with that one. Um, but either way, this movie is horror because it's, vampires and Dracula and all that. And I don't know, like, what the story is about exactly, other than, I guess, Dracula's daughter. But this is a movie I've heard about for a long time because I've talked about this before, but I do a panel at conventions called Queer Representation in Media, in which I talk about, well, queer representation in media. And I talk about the different movies, shows, games, comics, etc., that have had queer representation, and that stems back to where it all began. And so, of course, I was going to mention in that what was the first movie ever to feature queer representation, what was the first American movie, and stuff like that. And this was one that I had put on that slideshow for the panels. But I've never actually seen it. And I mean, that's fair. I wanted to include just like all this information, even if I've never actually seen the content. Because I figured I'd probably see it at some point. And here we are. For Pride Month, I decided this might be a fun thing to do. To go back and see this movie from, again, 1936. Pretty close to 100 years ago. Not quite there, but pretty damn close nonetheless. And just to see, like, how the representation kind of started here in America. Because, like, obviously we've had representation in movies from, like, the 60s and 70s and 80s that weren't always the best. The representation wasn't always, like, super flattering. Sometimes it was played for laughs. Sometimes it was stereotyped heavily. And then there was other times where, like, characters were, like, baited to be queer. Queer baited, if you will. And it never, like fully dedicated itself to actually following through with that. So going back to 1936, I'm just wondering how the representation is done. And I'm fully prepared that it's not going to be, like, amazing. It might be one of those cases where it's, like, super subtle. It might be one of those cases where it's not really talked about a lot. It might be to where it's, like, played, not necessarily, I don't think it's going to be played for laughs in a movie like this, I guess. But it might be, like, unserious in how it's handled. I'm prepared for all kinds of things. There's all kinds of paths it could take, which could prove to be an issue. But I'm not going to assume either. For all I know, this might actually, be fairly good with its representation. I don't know. But I'm very curious to find out. I talked about this a bit during Werewolf Week, like a couple weeks ago. I like vampires. I like vampire media, but I do like werewolf stuff a little bit more because I think it's a little more interesting, and you don't get it as much. Vampire media is so overplayed at this point. it's so oversaturated. But this came out in a time where it probably wasn't. There definitely wasn't as much in those days. Yeah, there was still, books and vampire stuff here and there, but it just wasn't as oversaturated. And I'm curious to see what they do in terms of the lore, because there's some lore that obviously started with Bram Stoker's book. There's some lore that started with different movies that have come out. And so it's like I'm wondering exactly what lore they're going to have here in terms of like what affects vampires, how you kill them, different things they can and cannot do, stuff like that. And it's also pretty interesting to do this so soon after having reacted to Sinners, because, that being a vampire movie too, but more modern, but also set in the past. I think that's set, funny enough, in the 30s, isn't it? I think Sinners was set in the 30s. So Sinners was set during the time period that this movie came out. That's really fascinating to me for a number of reasons. Um, I'm very curious to see what they do with this, and I'm also curious to see some of the acting, because again, I think this might be the oldest movie on the channel, and I don't know if I've seen a movie from the 30s, and I mean, unless like was Snow White. I think Snow White was from the 40s, but that was also animated, so that's different. And I've seen older animated stuff. I don't think I've seen a live action movie from this time period, so I'm curious to see what the acting is like. I've seen like a couple silent films, but that's older, and that's also very different. Because silent films like had a very specific style of acting to them. Let's be honest. At least the ones I've seen. Um, but yeah, I'm definitely interested to check this out, because again, this is the first American-made film to feature a queer character, and it's, to my knowledge, the main character. I believe it's Dracula's daughter herself, and I believe the name is Countess Maria. I might be a little off on that, but I believe that's the name. That being said, let's just get into this and see what this is like. Hold up just a sec. Before you click that link down in the description below to get to today's video, I want to remind you of all the awesome content we have both on this channel and the Princess of Gaming channel. Let's check it out. And we are back, and we'll begin with spoilers in 3, 2, 1, now. This is a movie that could use a modern remake because of the time this was released. It's very clear that this movie wanted to do more with the queerness of Count Maria, or Countess Maria, rather, but couldn't. And this is because at the time, the Hays Code and the PCA were regulating movies heavily on what they could and could not include. And queerness was one of those things that really had to be subtle. It was something that most studios weren't even able to even consider putting in, because the Hays Code, the PCA, they wouldn't allow it. But it was also around this time the studios began to get a little more creative with things and began to delve into some factors that that did things in a way to where it would be more subtle, and it wouldn't be in your face and everything. And it sucks that it had to get around that in that way, but it's one of those cases where it's just a product of the times, and they couldn't do more than. And I was expecting that. I went into this expecting that it was not going to be blatant, that it wasn't going to be super obvious. Like, if, like, even the aspect of her, like, Countess Maria by the end giving up on her dream of curing herself, and instead wanting to have the doctor, like, become a vampire with her and stay with her, feels very much like it was forced in, and just like rushed into that by, like, maybe not even the studio, but by the PCA in this case. It feels like it was forced into the film rather than naturally occurring. For her to just suddenly give up on her dream of curing herself and living a normal life. And this movie is clearly, like, steeped in metaphor, because again, you couldn't get away with more blatant representation. And I'm sure there's various ways you can probably read this, but I feel like Countess Maria's entire story, her character path that she goes down in this, it very much feels like a metaphor for queerness. The way that she looks at, like, specifically two of these female characters, first Lily and then Janet. Like, the fact that after, like, she brings Lily there to try and paint her. And this was, like, what she wanted to do, because she was trying to, like, get over her urges. But, like, when Lily, you know, shows off her it's the 1930s, shows off her shoulders and everything, it's like that, like, lures Countess Maria in to, like, lose control. It's like, it's subtle, but you understand what's going on there. She gave in to her desires after seeing this girl start to partially disrobe. We get it. And then at the end there, before the doctor comes into the castle, you see Maria, like, standing over Janet, and she starts leaning in towards her, and you're like, a person would, like, kind of naturally think, oh, she's leaning in to possibly bite her and everything. But it's already been stated multiple times by Countess Maria herself, one of those times, that she's not going to hurt Janet because she needs her alive in order to, you know, lure him in order to keep him, like, able to listen to her and everything. And the way she's leaning into her while, like, holding her face and everything, it's like, no, there's more there that they wanted to express and just couldn't. It, like, she seems interested in her. Like, not from a victim standpoint, let's put it that way. But again, Countess Maria's entire kind of, like, character arc in this is, I view it as, like, a big metaphor for queerness and trying to almost fight that. But I don't know, like, exactly which, like, side to things you're supposed to view it, but I might view it in a different way than others, because here's how I view it. So, as we know, Countess Maria throughout this is trying to rid herself of her vampirism, something that she actively hates, and she wants to be able to live what she calls a normal life. But in the end, she gives into it. She gives up and just lets it be, and her goal changes from trying to cure it to trying to turn the doctor and have him just live with her in Transylvania. And I view it this way. Her, as a vampire, is her, like, against her natural urges, right? Because she doesn't want to be a vampire. And her at the end choosing like to forego like the possibility of cure and instead choosing to stay with, or wanting him to stay with her, that's her rejecting her actual desires. She's lost hope. She's lost faith that she can be who she wants to be. That felt very much to me like she's just settling. And in this case, she wants him to be with her because she's settling, and he's like, I guess, the best option at the moment. So her choosing him to like stay with her as his, as her immortal partner, basically, is her rejecting her lesbianism, her rejecting her queerness. Her actual goal throughout the movie, her like trying to rid herself of her vampirism, is a metaphor for her ridding herself of straightness in a way, of, classical conventionalism. She wants to be herself. She wants to like follow her true desires, which again, metaphorically, seems to represent her wanting to be queer, wanting to follow in the idea of, pursuing women. Again, something that had to be more subtly handled, but still. And again, her giving up on that is because she lost hope that it was going to be possible. So she settled, and she settled for him. And that's why she was saying, like, a life for a life and everything. It's like, you stay with me and I'll let her go. Because she's letting go of that desire for women if he stays with her. It's an interesting way to handle things, but it's really the only way they could have done it at the time. And that's why I say that this would work great as a modern remake, because they could do this in the modern day and take all that subtext and just take off the sub part of that, make it completely blatantly super fucking gay, and have it be kind of what was always intended, without, having all the censors stopping that from working, from being possible. They could remake it in the modern day and have Countess Maria be super fucking gay, and have the subtext be very in your face about that, and still tell basically the same story, but have it be less subtle. You could have her straight up kiss Lily or Janet. The metaphors can be made more blatant, to where it's like, it's not even trying to be subtle about what it's implying. And especially with her, again, settling at the end, giving up on her desires to instead be with a man. There's so much you could do. And with the amount of great actors nowadays, of course, there's so many who could easily portray this kind of role, too. I think that this movie would absolutely work in the modern day for a number of reasons. And with a lot of actors and actresses, especially, like, being more open to coming out as queer, like, we could have, like, some good authentic representation, too. And that's the kind of shit that makes me look at these old movies and see so much inherent value in them. Because 1936 was a very different time, and queerness was looked at very differently. And so, now that we're in a time where it's more widely accepted and more, defended, even though here in America, things aren't really being handled great at the moment with the political state of things. Um, the vast majority of people are more on board with it, or at least are just okay with it. They don't have any issues with it, at least, even if they're not like queer themselves. And as we continue along, it's just going to keep going more in that direction. It just is. No matter how much people try to stop it. And so it's actually kind of the perfect time for this to be remade. And if I look up right now, like let me look up here. There are so many great actresses who could easily play Countess Maria who are queer themselves. You have Amanda Stenberg, you have India Moore, Hunter Schafer. Like, you have so many who could easily play this character. Um, I mean, hell, you have Kristen Stewart would be phenomenal in the role, I think. Kristen Stewart is a phenomenal actress. She's super gay. It's like she would be amazing. Don't let Twilight ruin your view of her. In fact, that would actually be kind of fitting too because of her role in Twilight, getting to come into like a more serious vampire story that touches on queerness would be right up her alley. Let's be completely honest. I feel that would be like the perfect role for Kristen Stewart. um, but yeah, it's like I would love to see this movie remade. I also briefly looked up, like this said this was based on like a story by Bram Stoker. Apparently, it was based on Dracula's Guest to a degree, but things had to get changed a lot, and it like kind of barely resembles that. There's actually kind of a resemblance to the story of Carmilla, which obviously inspired a lot in and of itself, including the character within the Castlevania series, both the games and on Netflix. And Carmilla is like very much seen as like kind of the first lesbian vampire in fiction. Um, and so it's like, yeah, there's also that. That it's like there's definitely some takeaways from it with this. But yeah, that's really interesting in and of itself. I think this movie, like, for it being, based around horror and everything, I didn't see this as a horror movie. I saw this film as more akin to a drama with some horror elements to it, but I wouldn't call it a horror movie like flat out. Like Dracula, I would call a horror movie because that more like focuses on that. You know what I mean? Um, Now, I'll say my only real misgiving about this movie, outside of like, just the fact of at the time they couldn't do much with the queerness, my only real misgiving with what we were given is that I feel like one part of the storyline was completely abandoned. And with this movie being kind of short, it's like an hour, 11 minutes or so, um, it kind of makes sense. But like, what happened with Dr. Van Helsing's trial? That plot point was completely abandoned after a certain point, because the doctor was brought in to represent him or find a way to like prove his um not necessarily innocence, but that he was sane and everything, that he was like telling the truth and what he was going on about. Nothing came of that. After a while, it just like it stopped being about that to any degree, and it's like, oh, Van Helsing's just there to like be knowledgeable about vampires and like help out at the end to a degree, even though like he didn't do much of anything during the course of the movie outside of espouse like the myth of the vampire and everything. which is what led the doctor to be able to realize it was Maria and everything. So it did help to a degree, but you know what I mean. And it's just like the movie also ends super suddenly with like Countess Maria's death and everything at the hands of her own servant. Which I think it was intentional. I think he was disgruntled with the fact that she was prioritizing the doctor. I keep calling him the doctor. I think his name's Jeffrey, I think. Names aren't always like great with me. But yeah, but for prioritizing him instead of, Sander himself, who wanted the immortality and everything. He felt betrayed. He was definitely going to kill Jeffrey as well, but he got obviously interrupted and taken out himself. But yeah, he definitely intended to kill Maria there. Like, that was his intent. Because there's no way, for one, that he would have gotten a perfect shot through the heart, like, with a bow and arrow on accident. If he had just missed. No, he intended to kill her. Also, that's an interesting take on that, because in most lore, I think it does have to specifically be a stake, doesn't it? So the fact that an arrow works just because it's made of wood is like, that's interesting. I feel like there's some vampire stories where it can be just anything wood, as long as it's driven through the heart. But I think in most stories it does specifically state a wooden stake. So it's like, maybe it's just the idea that a wooden stake is just like, it's already sharp and pointy and everything, so it's just easier to view it that way. But I don't think I've seen an arrow used as a way to do it. That's just really fascinating to me. I like the performances in this. Countess Maria, I can't remember the actress's name. It said so. It said what it was. I just can't think of it at the moment. Give me a second here. Let me look it up. Dracula's Daughter, 1936. Interestingly, the movie is listed here in terms of genre as horror fantasy. But again, I don't really see it as horror. I see it as a drama. Gloria Holden. She did great as Countess Maria. You definitely got her, like, regalness in this, but also her desperation to heal herself. She got, like, excitable at times. She showed a lot of range of emotion. She actually passed away before I was even born in March of 1991. What else was she in? Just out of curiosity. The Life of Emile Zola. Okay. Oh, really? Her performance in Dracula's Daughter influenced the writings of Anne Rice, Interview with a Vampire. And Dracula's Daughter is directly mentioned in Anne Rice's novel, The Queen of the Damned. That's really fascinating. Her last film was 1958's This Happy Feeling. So she wasn't even in a lot. She didn't do a huge amount of film work. She was only active for like 24 years. Which seems like a lot, but when movies weren't coming out super often back then. Yeah, there's not a lot of films here mentioned for her. There's The Man Without a Country mentioned as well, but... Oh, there's a lot of... Oh, okay, no, never mind. There's a lot more here. It's just listed in a separate place for some reason. Her final film role, outside of This Happy Feeling, actually came out same year, but just after that, but it was uncredited. So it was just a very small, like, role. It says she was a guest at a garden party in a 1958 film called Auntie Mame, or Ma'am, however it's pronounced. So yeah, that was her last starring role, her last major role was in This Happy Feeling, but her last role altogether was in that. And her very first role was the return of Shando, a 1934 serial where she was once again a party guest. So her film career actually both started and ended with her playing a party guest. Dracula's Daughter was her third film role. After that, and then there was a movie called Wife versus Secretary. Nothing I'm recognizing here in terms of her other stuff. Uh, Maybe Strange Holiday sounds a little familiar, but I don't know. But yeah, she did great. The Doctor's actor did fantastic. I liked Janet's actress. She had such great sass to her. And the guy who played the hospital guy, the guy with the big mustache who called the doctor on the phone, and he's like, "There's a cage at the zoo for you" and stuff. It's like that guy was fantastic. He had like the perfect like offended reaction there. He for such a small role, he was great. I just I think the performances were good. The pacing was fine. I had no real issue with that. Um, this cinematography, the sets, the costume design was good. Yeah, I just thought it was a good movie. It could have been better, but that's again just due to the time and everything, and especially with the movie being unable to, truly represent the queerness as much as it should have been able to. Um, but I'm glad that they were able to at least present this in a way where, yeah, people can understand what's being said here. People can understand what's trying to be gotten across. And I really appreciate that. I really like that they're able to get that theme across in such a subtle way. It's well done, is what I'm getting at. And it is a worthy addition to our Pride special for this year. So we should only have one more video left in the Pride special for 2025. So stay tuned for that next week. Thank you so much for tuning in. Let me know your thoughts on Dracula's Daughter down below. And for now, I'm Connie and I'm signing off. See y'all next time.